The Typhoon Temporal Battlecruiser. Alright, let's take a deep dive to see what this ship really can do. Okay, before we start off, this isn't going to be a straightforward build video. While the setup I have on this thing is fairly budget build oriented, I am going to be offering other suggestions on what you can do with this ship, because there is a variety of things you can do on the ship. This being a temporal battlecruiser, it is fairly versatile, especially having that secondary command seat. You're probably not going to get too much usage out of that due to the fact that it is also on the tactical seat, but the option is there. So this thing is going to be able to do quite a few different things, which is really impressive given the fact that this is a free event ship. I remember being fairly harsh on this thing because of this command seat, and honestly I was more harsh than I should have been on this thing, because this is still a free ship that is a full temporal ship. This is a really nice ship, and honestly I've been really enjoying flying this thing. What I've been running on here is basically a cannon scatter volley build, a fairly budget-oriented one at that, somewhat. I know some of you are going to take issue with that because it happens inevitably, but I tried to, lighten up things more so than I normally do in the consoles and starship traits. The reason I went with Scatter Volley too is because Scatter Volley by its very nature is more budget friendly than the other firing modes, because Withering Barrage is available on like 7 different ships, one of which is free, which you can get for free during the Klingon recruitment event. That's the M'Challa refit. And this being a battlecruiser, while it can't use Scatter Volley 3 because it only has a Lieutenant Commander tactical seat, it can still equip dual cannons. So the option for Scatter Volley is there, and even with Scatter Volley 2, it is still a quite viable option as well. That said, if you wanted to go with beams instead, that is a perfectly viable option. You could easily go with either dual beam banks or beam arrays if you wanted to do a broadside build on this thing. Though personally, I'm not a huge fan of broadsiding on temporal ships, mostly because a lot of the temporal abilities are not friendly to broadsiding. A lot of them have forward-facing arcs. Like here, Heisenberg Amplifier has a 180-degree arc, Chronometric Inversion Field, 135-degree arc. Same thing with Timeline Collapse. So let's get into like the actual build itself. For a cannon scatter volley build, basically just dual heavy cannons in the front. It really doesn't matter what dual heavy cannons that you're using, but just dual heavy cannons in the front. Those are really your best option for a cannon scatter volley build, because they have that built-in extra crit severity buff, which is really nice for them. Alternatively, though, there are other options if you wanted to go a little bit more high-end. Like obviously I'm using the Terran Task Force dual heavy cannons from the Reputation, from the Terran Reputation. These are the phase cannons, the wide arc dual heavy phase cannons from the Lobi store, which they're basically the phase cannons from Enterprise. But despite being from Enterprise, they're surprisingly powerful. So if you have the Lobi, I would definitely recommend getting these for a cannon build. Quad cannons, again, probably, I know quad cannons aren't like the best thing ever because they feed off of partially off of your engine power. Usually dual heavy cannons get a little bit more power out of these, but I still like having the quad cannons. Don't ask me why, I just do. But alternatively, if you don't have access to any of the quad cannons, just throw on any dual heavy cannon that you have. And then again, I've got an actual dual heavy cannon here. This is a radiolytic phaser, which is lockbox gear. These aren't even in the Infinity lockboxes yet, so they are kind of a pain in the butt to get. So again, just use whatever dual heavy cannons you have access to. Do not feel like you have to go with these. I like the radiolytics because they do a bit of extra bonus damage against targets with low health. So it's not a proc either. So that's one of the reasons why I like them, because it's a guaranteed effect rather than a 2.5% chance of something to happen. That's why I like these better, which is nice because I've only got the 2 of them, so it's still a guaranteed effect. Whereas if I was running like my agony phasers, which I typically run also, the 2.5% proc would have very low chance of hitting, because I mean I'd only have the 2 of them, the dual heavy cannon and then the turret in the back. So this guaranteed effect is much nicer to have. But that said, it's not going to make a huge amount of difference which ones you pick. So again, don't feel like you have to go out of your way to get radiolytic phasers for this slot or whatever other slots you got. Use what dual heavy cannons that you have. Oh, and again, don't feel obligated to go with phaser either. Like, I just chose phaser because I like phaser. Phaser's pretty easy to build for, but you could use whatever damage type that you really like. And of course, in the front, I've also got a torpedo here. This is the Dark Matter Quantum Torpedo from the Discovery Reputation. I found this to be a pretty good budget option. Well, budget-ish option. You still got to work for it because obviously the reputations you need to grind out the XP for. But once you have those ground out, this is a really good weapon to use if you don't have some of the stronger options like a Maelstrom Torpedo, which so far there are only 2 Maelstrom Torpedoes. Which are the Maelstrom Quantum Torpedo, which was the Maelstrom Quantum was from the legendary Akira, so again, that one's going to be expensive. The other one, I forget the name of it. The Maelstrom Trifluoride, that's the other one. This was an event reward, so if you missed out on this, you probably don't have this one either. So again, either the Maelstroms would be a good option for this one, just for the, the heavy one-hit power, but if you want something a little less maintenance, something you can just easily spam, the Dark Matter Torpedo is still a great option, especially because it also has some nice set bonuses too. In the aft weapons, because I went with a scatter volley build, obviously I've got turrets in the back, mostly. There's a radiolytic phaser turret here. Again, if you don't have radiolytics, use whatever you like. This is the advanced inhibiting heavy phaser turret. This is out of the Gamma Reputation. I've been using this more. I used to always default to the trilithium phaser turret, but I've been using that a lot less because its proc, again, it's a 2.5% proc, so it has very little chance of actually triggering its haste buff, which is nice when it actually hits, but if it doesn't, whatever. Additionally, that one can't be re-engineered, which is annoying. This actually can be re-engineered. But also because this is a heavy phaser turret, it actually does a bit more base damage than your average turret. So this one's actually pretty nice. Also, it does a bit of extra damage if you're going faster than your enemy. That's not going to come up a huge amount, but it's still a decent turret. And lastly, an omnidirectional beam, which it might seem weird on a cannon build, but this is the Pavo Proton Beam, and this thing, it still baffles me that this thing has basically replaced all Omni Beams because of its resonance charge ability. It's crazy. You'll see this in the parse later. This thing does crazy amounts of damage, and the really nice thing about it is that even though it is an Omni Beam, it is still triggered off of Cannon Scatter Volley, so you can use this on a beam build or a cannon build with no consequence at all. But again, these are just the ones that I picked. Ultimately with a scatter volley build, what really matters is just throwing dual heavy cannons in the front, plus a torpedo, and then some turrets in the back. It really doesn't matter which ones you have, just make sure they're fairly decent, that you upgrade them to Mark 15. That's another thing too. A lot of people always get hung up about, when I'm on a budget build, oh, how am I supposed to get all that gold gear? Do not worry about gold gear. The most important thing when upgrading your gear is to get it to Mark 15 first. Gold, getting it to Epic should be a much more secondary concern. Focus on getting to Mark 15 first. Anyway, in the core gear, again, fairly typical setup for me, which is the Draenor Fleet Colony deflector for the extra crit chance and crit severity. We've got the competitive reputation engine for the speed buff. The Tholian warp core for the warp crystals, which kind of lay out like mines. And this was an event reward, and the Discovery Reputation shield, just because it's a pretty powerful shield, and it also gives you some extra damage against enemy shields too, which is kind of nice. But again, you don't have to stick with this setup. You could go with something a little more tank oriented. You could like ditch the Tholian warp core and go with the Discovery Reputation warp core instead, so you can get that 2-piece to increase your hull regeneration. You could also go with the new Kittimer set, which was a recent event reward. This one is actually pretty decent, especially if you're using anti-proton instead. The shield from that actually synergizes really well with anti-proton builds. But the 3-piece on that one is also pretty nice because you get that group cloaking effect that'll also give you 15% bonus damage to the entire team. So that's kind of a nice support set there if you want to use that instead. The devices, again, my usual setup for pretty much any energy weapon build. I'll just put those on the screen here. Moving on to the consoles, yes, I've got a bunch of isomags in here, which I'm sure some of you are going to bulk at using on what I call a budget build, but you can get these on a free-to-play setup. It's going to take you a bit of a grind, but it is doable. That said, this thing has the same number of engineering consoles as it does tactical consoles, so you could easily just replace these with Spire consoles if you prefer. Now, for the universal consoles, again, I went with the Valdor console to help out with the survivability a little bit. This helps keep your shields up a bit faster, and this is a really good budget console because it comes off of a tier 3 ship, the tier 3 Valdor, so that's kind of nice. Additionally, we've also got Lorca's custom fire control because I am using the dark matter torpedo, so I figured the 2-piece off of that would be kind of nice. And if you're running a beam build on this thing instead, so if you're running fire at will, you could throw in the dual beam bank from this set as well, and then you can have the full 3-piece. We've also got the subspace fracture tunneling field off of the Vovine, that's the T6 Obelisk, which this thing has been a huge game changer for your universal console cooldowns, which honestly, it makes me feel like I went a little overboard on the unconventional systems triggers. I'll get more to that later. But beyond that, those 3 I think are really great utility consoles to have just for like general purpose DPS / survivability / cooldown management. These 3 are really nice to have, but the rest of these 3 you can kind of change out however you like. Like I'm using the enhanced plasma manifold, which is an old budget trick I like to use in conjunction with onboard dilithium crystallizer. That's a starship trait that's easy to get to. So I'm using that on this setup. We've also got the M6 tactical computer, which comes off of, what's it called? The Perseus. It comes off the Perseus Tactical Escort, which is a tier 3 ship. So you can get that for free. Not for free. You can get that for dilithium. So that's an easy pickup to get. And then we've got one C-Store trait, there's one C-Store console on here, which is Fleet Power Network Array, which is a really powerful haste buff for this thing. So definitely would recommend picking that up from the C-Store if you haven't already. That comes off of the Awani command carrier. And I threw on the Domino just for an additional haste buff. I know throwing this on a budget build, some people are going to be like about because it is a Phoenix Prize ship. So those epic Phoenix Prize awards can be difficult to get unless you completed that one event a while back, which gives you a free Phoenix Prize event, or Phoenix Prize token. So you could, if you completed that event, you could pick this up pretty easily. But yeah, but again, do not feel obligated to replicate this setup. There are plenty of other consoles that would really benefit this build, really, because like there's a bunch of other stuff in here. Really, anything that benefits phaser, like the quantum phase converter with this buffs phaser, or approaching agony, this buffs phaser and deals phaser damage itself. There's other stuff in here that buffs crit chance or crit severity, like the 0 point energy conduit. This comes from the Romulan reputation. This buffs crit chance. From the Lobi store, there's tachyokinetic converter. This buffs crit chance and severity and buffs your turn rate, which is actually going to be pretty nice on this ship because this being a battlecruiser, it's not the most maneuverable thing. Some of you might want an extra turn rate buff, and this would actually be a good option for that. There's Ordnance Accelerator, that buffs phaser. There's Bioneural Infusion Circuits, that buffs crit severity. This has the highest crit severity buff of any individual console in the game, so this is still a really great option to have. Oh, here, there's Sensor Phantom Projector. This is great for more flanking damage. So if you're really focused on exploiting flanking damage, Sensor Phantom Projector off of the Cyclone is really nice. There's Flagship Tactical Computer, really good for haste. That comes off of the Endeavor. And then there's also more of that set, too. You can also throw in adaptive... what's it called? Here it is, Adaptive Emergency Systems. This one comes off of the Sojourner, so that way you can get the 2-piece with the Flagship Tactical Computer. There's a lot of stuff here that you can use. So, like, just focus on stuff that buffs phaser damage or whatever damage type you're using. Stuff that buffs crit chance, crit severity, energy weapon haste. There's a lot of different buffs that you can focus on that will be beneficial to this build. You don't even have to go with just strictly damage too. You can go with something that also buffs damage, not damage resistance. The actual damage resistance really isn't all that helpful, but stuff that buffs shield heals, hull heals, if you wanted to go more of a tanking route. There's a lot of stuff you can do here. In the specializations, I stick with my usual Intel Temporal setup, just because it really isn't anything that really beats space flanking as well as Entropic Rider. It's kind of the catch-all for everything for any sort of DPS build. If you really wanted to, you could switch it up to Miracle Worker if you really wanted to focus on tanking, but honestly there are better ships to go on a pure tank setup. For this, at most, I would want to go for like a mixed DPS tank hybrid on this one, and so even with that, I would still want to go with Intel Temporal. Moving on to the traits, I'm just going to put these up on the screen because this is pretty much just my usual setup. But again, just like with the consoles, you just want to use stuff that's going to buff the traits that you want to buff. Are you running like a pure DPS build? You're going to want to buff stuff that buffs you know, stuff like crit chance, you know, like on adaptive offense here, this buffs crit chance and severity, you know, kind of flip-flops between one and the other. Context is for kings. This is a damage resistance rating and a bonus all damage buff. Again, it flip-flops between the two, so these two are kind of nice, but a lot of these others, like symbiotic ice, that shouldn't be on here because this isn't the beam build. That's embarrassing. Oh god, I left beam training on here too. Okay, that's a little embarrassing. Okay, so that should be there. And what should I swap the other one out for? Here we go, a little more crit chance and crit severity. Oh yeah, that's a little embarrassing, but yeah. So yeah, that's another thing to look out for. Be sure you're using the correct personal traits when doing stuff, because some stuff will buff stuff you don't want on the build. Like this one, I don't want to buff beams because I'm only using the one beam array, which is an omni beam, which I don't want to buff. I want to buff the cannons. But yeah, you just want to focus on stuff that is going to be of benefit to your build, whether it be more damage in whatever shape or form that it comes in, either in crit chance or crit severity, general damage to your weapons, just all-purpose bonus damage, stuff like that, or haste, stuff like that. Or do you want more survivability, in which case you can go with something that, you know, provides some additional hull heals, something like that, something like what's it called? Here it is, living hull. This can be nice for some extra hull regeneration, which if you're going for like a mixed tank setup, you definitely want to focus more on regeneration than actual damage resistance. It's going to be much more beneficial overall. But yeah, ultimately just use what is available to you, what is going to be of benefit to your build. You don't have to feel obligated to replicate my setup entirely, just because, you know, I am a crazy person who's been playing this game for a very long time, so I have a lot of stuff. Moving on to the starship traits, again, I did try to keep this on a little more budget friendly. I didn't use any like lockbox or promo starship traits, but there are some C-store traits in here, so it's not going to be a 100% free build, but it is going to be a little easier on your wallet than some of my other builds. But again, I will provide some alternative options in case you don't have some of the stuff I'm using. The first of which is emergency weapon cycle off of the Arbiter, as well as the Kurok, the Morrigu, as well as their legendary counterparts. This is like a basic trait for any energy weapon build. Of course, I've got this on here. This is used to reduced weapon power cost, as well as buff my firing cycle haste. Both of which are really valuable traits, or both of which are very valuable options for a energy weapon build. Onboard dilithium crystallizer. This will give me bonus damage for my power levels as long as they are above. Above? Remember when you clicked on a trait and it just went to the trait? What happened to that? I missed that. There we go. As long as you keep any of your non-weapon subsystems and power past maximum, you will get a bonus damage buff, and that is why we've got the onboard dilithium crystallizer. That's why we got the enhanced plasma manifold to help out the onboard dilithium crystallizer to get that extra power. This is going to be a bit more easier if you are also an engineer, because you got EPS power transfer, you get even more power. Bam! So all three of these are past maximum, so that is plus 30% bonus damage anytime I use an emergency power ability. Sorry if I seem a little rambly in this video. I want to point out I have not been sleeping very well, so if I seem a little off, that's why. Things have been kind of crazy here lately. Anyway, moving on to Calm Before the Storm. This comes off of the Cardassian Flight Deck Carrier, which is a C-Store ship. This is a really nice haste buff. It starts off as a damage resistance rating buff. You know, that'll continue to stack up, and then it'll turn into firing cycle haste buff instead, plus 33%, which is really nice. So this can be a good one for a little bit of extra tanking in the beginning, and then it turns into full DPS trait. Then next is Withering Barrage, which comes off of so many ships at this point. This comes off of the T6 Defiant, the Burrell, the T6 Burrell, the T6 what's it called, the Tavaro or the Malum, whatever the Romulans called it, as well as their legendary versions, as well as the free M'Challa Bird of Prey from the Klingon recruitment event. So there's like 7 different ships. It's hard not to have this trait at this point. Yeah, this is your extension trait for Cannon Scatter Volley. Kind of, again, basic thing for Cannon Scatter Volley to have. But if you're not using Cannon Scatter Volley, you're going to swap that out for a different firing mode starship trait. Like if you're using Beam Fire at Will, you're going to swap that out for what's it called? The Twin Tactical Matrices off of the Gagarin. Or if you're using Cannon Rapid Fire, what are you doing? Why are you using Rapid Fire? That's the least budget-friendly option on here. because that requires go for the kill. Alternatively, there's also beam overload, which also not super budget friendly because that needs super weapon ingenuity, which comes off of the Zindi Adaleth Dreadnought, which is a low buy store ship. But yeah, that's why I went with Scatter Volley, because it is the most budget friendly option. But if you are not using Scatter Volley, you will want to swap this out for whatever trait you want to extend that firing mode instead. Next is Improve Critical Systems. This is from the Temporal recruitment event. Again, this is a decent free trait that I like. It's good for buffing crit chance and crit severity anytime I use an emergency systems ability, which I have 2 on this build. So this one's kind of nice. And then these 2 are pretty nice for temporal ships, which this is. This is temporal tunneling off of the Atlantis. So anytime I use a temporal operative ability or anything that deals exotic damage, I will gain plus 100% firing cycle haste for 5 seconds, which the thing with this one is you got to have a lot of stuff that triggers it. So this is why I pretty much just use this on temporal ships, because while 100% firing cycle haste is a lot, 5 seconds is not a long time. So you need to be triggering that fairly often for this to be of benefit. The last starship trait on here is Heart of Soul. This comes off of the Temporal warships, all of which are C-Store versions. These are a little weird on how they unlock, so you'll only ever get Heart of Soul on a Federation character, no matter which version of the no matter which version of the Temporal warships that you unlock. So each trait on those ships is faction locked, even though the ships themselves are not faction locked. So if you own just the Edison, no matter which so if you own just the Edison and you unlock its trait, which trait you get will depend on what faction you're on. So if you're on a Federation character, you will get Heart of Soul. If you're on a Romulan character, even if you're using like something like the Edison, you will get Legacy of Mulrihan. I think it's Legacy of Romulus. I forget what they called it, but that's the one that buffs Plasma, and then the Jem'Hadar version will buff Polaron, and the Klingon version will buff Disruptor. So yeah, what that 5% bonus damage you get is going to depend on what faction you get. So because this is a Federation character, this is going to buff, give a 5% bonus damage buff to Phaser as well. But yeah, it triggers off of Attack Pattern Beta or any Temporal operative ability, so obviously this is going to be pretty helpful on this ship as well. But again, do not feel obligated to just completely replicate my setup. There are other traits on here that would benefit this ship, whether it be for the sake of improving your damage. You know, you can do other stuff like Overpowered and Overgunned, which is basically just, emergency weapon cycle, but not as good. Pilfer Power is another decent budget trait, because that one's also free out of the lock boxes, just like onboard Dilithium Crystallizer. You can just pick either of those up off the exchange. Let's see what else. As silly it is, rapid emitting armaments is always good on pretty much anything. Just even on a non-torpedo build, those plasma torpedoes hit pretty powerfully. Just be careful not to destroy yourself with them. Ship of the line, always good. Strike from Shadows would work on here. Supercharged weapons, if you are using the full Discovery set, so if you're using like a Fire at Will and you have the full Dark Matter Quantum torpedo set, where'd it go? Supercharged weapons is actually really nice to have, because it'll trigger off of that extra Dark Matter torpedo you get from the 3-piece. So that can be pretty nice to have. That comes off of the Endeavor Tactical Star Cruiser. Obviously, Terran Goodbye or Ruin of Our Enemies would be really good here. Because this is a Scatter Volley build, Thirst for Blood off of the legendary Bortosk would be pretty decent too. Would really help out with your turn rate and flight speed. So if you're really struggling with getting the ship to move efficiently, Thirst for Battle would actually be pretty nice here. But yeah, again, do not feel obligated to completely replicate my setup. There are a lot of different starship traits on here. So ultimately what your build is going to come down to is what you have available to you and what is going to be of benefit to your specific build. And that's not going to be necessarily the same as what I have. So use what you got. Moving on to space reputation traits. Again, this is going to be a pretty typical setup. We've got advanced targeting systems for the crit severity, Tyler's duality, and precision for the crit chance, magnified firepower for the bonus damage to my weapons, and controlled countermeasures for the bonus damage to my weapons against controlled targets. And this being a temporal ship, I've got a lot of control abilities. Again, if you're wanting to go for like a mixed tank setup, what's it called? Energy refrequencer. This can be really nice for like an off-tank setup. So yeah, if you're wanting to get a little extra survivability out of the build, maybe swap this in for, instead of controlled countermeasures. In the bridge officer stations, first off, in the lieutenant level universal, I've got emergency power to engines and emergency power to weapons. Those are both for the sake of triggering other stuff, but their actual abilities are kind of nice too. Emergency power to weapons is giving me a little bit more speed and maneuverability, and emergency power to weapons is giving me a bit more weapon damage, as well as weapon power. This is mostly here just for the sake of triggering emergency weapon cycle, and this is mostly just here for triggering the emergency con hologram, which we'll see in the duty officers. But yeah, they're, you still want to have them. As well as I've also got other starship traits on here that are also triggered off of emergency power abilities. So again, that's why this is being used as the engineering seat, because the engineering seat is basically being used as all temporal, which is Heisenberg amplifier, chronometric inversion field, and timeline collapse, all of which are unconventional systems triggers. They're also pretty decent abilities on their own too. So you get that whole the whole temporal entropy mechanic going on with these, so you can build entropy and then take it away. It's the interesting mechanic. You're not going to do a whole lot of damage with it on a battlecruiser like this, because I'm not expecting for an EPG build on this thing, but still a little extra damage there. And then of course recursive sharing 3, because this is a temporal ship. Of course I want this thing for its massive one-hit capability, because it basically builds up damage from all sources and then just smacks your target that you've marked with it with a certain amount of all that damage. In the tactical seating, we've got Scatter Volley 2, because I can't fit Scatter Volley 3 in here. Attack Pattern Beta 1 for its debuff. This is always a nice one to have, because that debuff is fairly strong. Chemosite laced weaponry to add some radiation damage to my weapons. This is actually really nice with the dark matter torpedo, because the dark matter's what's it called? Dark matter disillusion. It's a damage over time effect that the dark matter quantum torpedo can give, and the nice thing about it is that damage over time effect will also trigger chemosite laced weaponry. So this paired with the DMQ can actually hit quite often, quite a lot. So that's pretty nice. And then, of course, we've got torpedo spread to spread around that DMQ even further. Now, if you really wanted to, you could mix this up a little bit. Like, because this is a command seat, you could throw in, like, suppression barrage in here, or maybe concentrate firepower if you really wanted to. Honestly, I think suppression barrage would be a bit more useful on an energy weapon build. Concentrate firepower I really only use with like an actual torpedo build for this setup, and I wouldn't use this as like a pure torpedo build here, because you're gonna have to choose between concentrate firepower 3 and high yield 3. So yeah, just use the Eagle if you want to use a torpedo build. But yeah, for a beam setup, you could, instead of using fire at will 3, knock it down to fire at will 2, and then throw suppression barrage 1 into this lieutenant commander spot. But honestly, then you would be losing out on attack pattern beta, and I feel like more of you are going to want access to attack pattern beta than you are going to want suppression barrage, because suppression barrage just debuffs enemy damage output, whereas attack pattern beta actually debuffs enemy damage resistance. So you'll end up doing more damage to them instead of them doing less damage to you. It depends on where you want to prioritize, but yeah, I feel like attack pattern beta is the better option to go with. And then in the Lieutenant Commander Science seat, we've got more unconventional systems triggers with jam target sensors, scramble sensors, and then Gravity Well 1, which Gravity Well, while it is an uncon trigger, is just an overall really useful utility to have, because you could just control enemies by bringing them all into one spot, which is really nice with Scatter Volley, because then you could just use the cone attack from your Scatter Volley to hit all those enemies all at once. So because this is the science seat, you could throw in a heal here instead. Like hazard emitters wouldn't be a bad thing if you're wanting to go for a more off-tank setup. There are plenty of things that are triggered by heals, so hazard emitters is always a good option, because 1, it has a low cooldown, 2, it has a heal over time effect that is pretty nice, and it also removes damage over time effects from you, which can be really helpful when fighting enemies like the Borg, which love to put little plasma dots on you. You could also throw in Photonic Officer if you're using a more budget setup. Photonic Officer is really nice for lowering your bridge officer cooldowns if you don't have like these really expensive Borg duty officers. So like pair Photonic Officer with Boimler effect, or just keep it on its own. Like if you have improved Photonic Officer, which is a starship trait, you can just use just that with Photonic Officer. Then you can feel free to fill up your duty officers with whatever you like. There's plenty of options. I know I didn't really go that budget friendly with the duty officers. You know, budget doffs are hard to find, so it's really just a matter of just throw whatever's useful in there. I am using Vincent Kish here because this will give me a chance to upgrade my Cannon Scatter Volley 2 to Cannon Scatter Volley 3. So that's kind of nice there. The Emergency Con Hologram, this one's always a nice option because this will lower the cooldown of emergency or for evasive maneuvers every time I use emergency powered engines. This is really nice for increasing your general speed of your ship, and it's available in the Phoenix store, so it's pretty easy to get. Oh, and Vincent Kish, this is available on the exchange. Yeah, ultimately it's just a matter of, you know, finding stuff that's going to be of benefit to you. Like, and especially with these projectile guys or energy weapon guys, whichever one you prefer. Don't feel like you have to go with the purple ones. The purple ones are crazy expensive, but you know, if you can only afford the lower quality ones, just grab those instead. That's fine. Okay, I am developing a huge headache, so let's move on to the combat demonstration and then the combat log. Hi, Future Stu here. So I had originally planned to show you guys an ISE, a random ISE for the combat demonstration, and the footage for that is just gone. I don't know what happened to it. It was in a folder, and now that folder's empty now. I don't know what happened, and it's causing me a lot of headaches on top of the other headaches I already have. Because I mean, if you guys have been paying attention to everything else going on, things have been crazy around here, and I'm so tired. I'm so tired, man. Yeah. Instead, I'm going to be showing you guys Jupiter Gauntlet run. I do still have the combat log from that ISE though, fortunately, so I will be able to give you guys an idea of how it performs in ISE, and now I'll also be able to compare that to how it would perform solo in a Jupiter Gauntlet or whatever solo content you're running in. Okay, here is that Jupiter Gauntlet Elite run you guys just saw. That did about 383k, which is actually pretty good for a solo Jupiter Gauntlet, especially considering I had one death in that run. A little embarrassing. Alachi kind of overwhelmed me in that one part, but it happens, especially considering this is on a somewhat budgety build. And I didn't put a lot of emphasis into tanking on the compact on the build that I was demonstrating this on, which is why I offered a bunch of suggestions to add some additional tanking into that. Oh, one thing I did forget to mention, protomatter infusers, you can add those in there too. Also really good for DPS tanking and whatnot. So those are a really good option for that kind of stuff. You can get those on the Fleet Draenor colony. Anyway, that's a loud car going by my house. Anyway, in the analysis, you can see Resonant Shock did the most damage, doing 46k, which, again, this is why we like the Pavo Omni so much, why it has pretty much replaced all other set Omnis. The damage that Resonant Shock ability is able to put out is just absolutely crazy. You're going to see some like back and forth between Scatter Volley 2 and Scatter Volley 3. That's because of the Vincent Kish duty officer getting a little extra usage out of my Scatter Volley for my cannons. Thyllian Warp Crystals did about 13k, which is one of the reasons why I like that Thyllian Warp Core. It's a little bit of extra damage that you wouldn't normally get because it's a Warp Core. Usually they don't drop anything offensive like that, but yeah, that Thyllian Warp Core, it can be really nice in certain situations like this. But again, alternatively, sometimes you might want to prioritize tanking over that instead, so you might want to go with the Discovery Warp Core instead. Like I said, I did have one death in this run, so that is an option to think about. Honestly, not much more noteworthy in this, like beyond just the straight up damage, because like it's a Scatter Volley build. There's not much to point out beyond that. Now, this is the ISE run, which and that did a lot better. Did 732k on that one, though. I think a lot of that was because I got lucky and someone in here was seemingly running a tank build, possibly a support tank. Something like that, because they took in a lot of the attacks in, so I wasn't taking a lot of threat. And I know I don't know how many other people were running debuff stuff. I know Galactic Gaming was running some what do you call them, Type 7 shuttles, so there was some debuffing going on here. So this was a somewhat supported run, you could say. But yeah, over 700k on this setup is really nice. You can see pretty much similar to what you saw in the patrol. So a lot of damage out of Resonant Shock, a lot of the damage out of your cannons with under Scatter Volley, both 2 and 3, and then just a bunch of other stuff. Recursive Shearing didn't do as much as I thought it would. That's in here somewhere. There it is. Yeah, only 14k out of Recursive Shearing, but I probably could have done a little bit better on the timing with that. Yeah, but beyond that, I'm happy with the build. It's performing really well, both in team and solo content. Again, you can modify it to get a bit more survivability on it, to better suit your solo needs. But yeah, it's a solid setup for this ship. Oh, you know what? I should probably talk about the trait and console on this thing too, because they are part of this ship. Now, I'll start out with the Starship trait, because this thing is absolutely terrible. The Starship trait, Peaky Pack launch tubes, one of the worst traits I've ever seen. What it does is every time you fire a torpedo, it will fire an additional micro torpedo along with it, dealing a certain amount of kinetic damage. Now, obviously, this isn't a torpedo build. It's not buffed for kinetic damage, so obviously you would expect, well, it's not a torpedo build, so obviously, of course, it doesn't do a lot of damage. I tested this on my all torpedo build on the Legendary Akira, that one where literally everything is a torpedo. Still didn't even do, still did crap damage. I tested that in a random ISC with this Starship trait on it, and that piggyback launch tubes did 2.5k in a random ISC. That's absolutely pathetic. It's a terrible Starship trait. It needs to be buffed desperately if it wants to be taken seriously, but until then, I'm going to continue to talk crap about it, because this thing makes Black Alert look good. Me saying that should say a lot. But yeah, for the console, what was it called? It was Protonic Snare Projector. This one actually pretty nice. I wouldn't use it necessarily on this build, because this thing's real power is for an EPG build, because it deals proton damage, so it's technically an exotic damage form. If you wanted to set up like a pure proton damage build, you could also use it there too, but you know, this is proven really well on an EPG build. I tested this on my my build of the Premonition. It did fairly well. It did like 20k in a random ISE, and even then, I feel like I could have done better with it, because the trick with this thing is it sends out like a net of proton damage. It shoots off a net, and that net gets progressively bigger as it travels. So you need to be able to give it some travel time, and you need to be able to control all your enemies into one spot that net is going to travel through. So you want to make that net as big as possible, and you want to keep your enemies as huddled together as close as they possibly can. Well, maybe not necessarily super close if the net is big enough, but you get what I mean. The bigger the net, the more stuff you're going to hit. The more stuff you're going to hit, the more damage it'll do in total. Yeah, that is the Typhoon. Again, I mean, in my initial review of this thing, I was really harsh on it because of that command seat, but honestly, for a free ship, this thing is amazing. Like, I have been kind of blown away with how much fun I have been having in this ship. I mean, it does help that it is gorgeous. This is such a pretty ship. I love this thing so much. Just considering how potato-y the original looked and how it looks now, it is absolutely phenomenal. This is absolutely gorgeous, and it's a really nice ship. It's so wonderfully functional. You can get this. Seriously, if you are like any like free-to-play player or any like more serious player, myself will have a ton of fun in this thing, because it's a full Temporal Battlecruiser. Like, it is absolutely wonderful. And I really, like, for the ship itself, I really just cannot praise it enough. Like, yeah, the trade is garbage. The console is good, but not really good for this ship. But the ship itself, I'm very pleased with it. Anyway, I hope you found this guide to the Typhoon helpful. I know I was kind of a little all over the place with this one, just because I kind of have to with these, because, you know, you got to provide so many different options for budget builds like this, because the term budget is so up to interpretation with Stowe players. So I hope you forgive me, you know, kind of being a little scatterbrained with this one. But yeah, let me know if you found this helpful down below, and while you're down there, be sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. If you'd like to further support the channel, you can hit that join button to become a member, or you can find the link to the merch store down below, or if you are ever shopping on the Epic Game Store, be sure to use my content creator code STU1701. Any of those really help me out, and I really do appreciate it. Either way though, thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.